Hello and welcome to Solidarity, the Resource Center's podcast at UCSC. The purpose of Solidarity is to uplift the voices and actions of students who work at the Resource Center or with student organizations. I'm Mark. I use he, his pronouns, and I'm an intern with the ERC who will be hosting today's episode. Yuya, who is also in the background, is the other ERC intern who helps with much needed tech support as well as video editing. Please note that the opinions and views expressed in today's episode are of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UCSC Resource Centers. Today's episode is titled Sisters Not Cisters. If Nicole, if you could introduce yourself, share your pronouns, identities that you're comfortable with sharing, and which resource center you are part of.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a fourth year feminist studies and history student here at UC Santa Cruz. I was also a lead intern at the UCSC Womxns Center, and I worked there for the last year, almost year and a half. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. And so basically to give y'all some background on today's episode. So during the week of November 15th to 19th, which was last week for us because we are recording on the 23rd, the Womxns Center hosted a series of events titled Sisters Not Cisters. These events, in quote, aim to help create a space where trans and cis women can hold space together and find solidarity. And so in today's episode, we are welcoming back Nicole, who was the lead intern of the Womxns Center, as well as the facilitator of Sisters Not Cisters. And in today's episode, we will talk about the inspiration behind the event Sisters Not Cisters, the need for solidarity between trans and cis women, and discuss what that solidarity looks like. Okay, so moving into the first question, what is Sisters Not Cisters? If you could talk about the significance of the name, as well as the programming of the event.
Yeah, great question. So as you mentioned a little bit before, Sisters Not Cisters, what our intention with the programming was to create a space where trans and cis women could hold space together and find solidarity. And we also, with the programming, really aspired to make every trans individual and those questioning their gender identity feel seen, worthy, and validated, particularly trans women here at UC Santa Cruz. With our programming that we held last week, we provided education and community building opportunities for UCSC affiliates when we came together to support the trans community last week during Transgender Awareness Week. And really our intention with the programming was, to quote bell hooks, was to bring trans women from margin to center. Oftentimes trans women and feminist counter spaces really are decentered or left out of the conversation. There is such a lack of representation, I think, just in general. But so really we wanted to center trans women's experiences and really use storytelling through the documentary that we watched last week, as well as with their book discussion that we held, to really center the stories of trans women. And with that being said, we held a screening of the documentary Disclosure, which is a documentary really getting into how trans people are represented and even more so misrepresented in Hollywood and our current media landscape, right? And the consequences of that. Trans people have never been able to tell their own stories. Cis, straight, white men have always been the one to tell trans people's stories, which is wrong. And so that's what that documentary really gets into. And then we also had a book discussion for the book To My Trans Sisters, which was written by Charlie Craggs, but it's an anthology. It's a collection of letters written by various trans women around the globe who are differently situated, have different backgrounds, experiences, And it's a collection of letters written to trans women who are going to pick up that book, read it, and find a sisterhood with other trans women, right? Who can speak to what it's like to be a trans woman. And then lastly, we had a guided meditation event for trans resilience to close out Transgender Awareness Week. And that was very relaxing. So.
Okay, cool. Well, it was really nice to hear that out of such a busy week, you were able to, end it on such a nice, relaxing note with the guided meditation. Moving on to question number 2, or the question, I hated the way I phrased question number 2. Anyways, what was the inspiration behind creating this program? Or what was your inspiration behind creating this program?
Well, that's a great question. And really, I created the program because I felt that as a trans woman, when I entered differently held spaces, whether it was, a political kind of like student club organization, or it was being in a classroom, during, a discussion or whatever it may be, I felt that whenever I raised trans issues or, made an intervention, let's say, for example, when it comes to like healthcare, right? So, trans issues and, healthcare issues are related because trans people don't have adequate healthcare, right? And in order for, trans people to live authentic lives, we need to have healthcare access and do so in a way that is get, policies enacted where healthcare or health industries, recognize the gender affirming care that trans people need. And so, but I was always treated whenever I did so as if I was being divisive and using an identity politic to create an issue. I was kind of treated like a killjoy, there are bigger issues, right, that we need to address, talk about. Who cares about trans issues? And it was actually 2 years ago when I first transferred to UC Santa Cruz. I'm not going to say the club, but it was actually during Transgender Awareness Week, just a couple days shy of Transgender Day Remembrance. And I had mentioned that it was Transgender Awareness Week, and it was quiet. And after that meeting had kind of ended, a couple guys came up to me and asked, "Why are you bringing that up when there are more important issues? Like, how is that relevant to the political work that we're trying to get done?" And so that is why I think that this programming is so important. That's my dog. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So that's why I think this programming is important. And, also I think the Womxns Center was interested in doing it. I was interested in doing it. And what a great way to collaborate with the Cantu, with the African American Resource Center, right, to highlight these issues. So.
Yeah. And you definitely bring up a really good point there where we've discussed when preparing for this episode how even in the most diverse, quote unquote diverse spaces, there's always room for improvement. So as you mentioned, the events hosted were around Transgender Awareness Week. Could you explain the background/history of this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So Transgender Awareness Week is from November 13th through the 19th every year. And Transgender Remembrance Day is November 20th. So it caps off Transgender Awareness Week. These are yearly events when people and organizations transnationally raise the visibility of transgender people and address the complex systemic issues that members of the trans community face. And so and when it comes to these issues, we're not just talking about, pronouns and gender identity. We're talking about structural, systemic issues that, is about white supremacy, is about heteropatriarchy, systems of power that structurally disadvantage and enact violence on trans bodies. So either that's in our immigration law, right? Our criminal legal system, trans people are at a disadvantage, particularly trans people of color. And so that's what Transgender Awareness Week is about and should be about. Should be about uplifting the trans people who are at the margins. And when it comes to the historical context of Transgender Day of Remembrance, 23 years ago, Rita Hester was a Black trans woman who was murdered in her apartment just a couple days shy of her 35th birthday. And to this day, her murder remains unsolved. Her death, however, has sparked a movement to remember and commemorate stolen trans lives with an annual vigil, which is held the vigil on Transgender Day of Remembrance. And so we can publicly mourn the lives lost to anti-transgender violence. And unfortunately, the numbers of murders and homicides in the trans community has only increased year by year. I believe this year has marked the deadliest record for anti-trans violence murders, with 375 trans women being murdered. And those in the trans community, those who are murdered, their lives are taken from them, like more than 95% are trans women. So yeah, very heavy.
Yeah.
Very heavy.
It's very, very heavy.
Yeah. And I would say, and the vast majority of trans women who have been murdered are women of color or Black trans women. And a lot of it has to do, right, with, kind of someone's positionality, right? So if you're more vulnerable to, violence as a result of your socioeconomic status, compounded, with your gender identity, whether you face, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, if you're housed, your opportunities for survival, it really depends on that. And so those who are most subjected to these violences are people who are the most vulnerable. I believe over 50% of those who have been murdered were sex workers, right? And so because of the lack of opportunity, right, and the discrimination a lot of trans women face. So I think it's important that we always center those who need the most help, right, who are in survival mode. And we should be doing that by providing mutual aid, relief, and trying to do as much as we can, get involved, highlight this issue, not just talk about it, but do something about it.
And saying that, what were the main takeaways that you wanted the attendees of the event / what can folks do more specifically in order to walk in solidarity with trans women and femmes, in order to be that active ally, or in order to be a active ally?
Yeah. So, as a trans woman, as singular trans woman at the UCSC Womxns Center, the work that we did was very important to me, and the solidarity that was shown by the UCSC Womxns Center interns meant the world. I would say that we have a lot more work to do when it comes to people showing up for trans lives, particularly trans women. the turnout wasn't the greatest. And I know we live in a COVID world where people are busy, there's a lot going on. But, time and time again, trans issues are often kind of sidelined, not seen as legitimate issues to really organize around. So I'm hoping that this event fostered, the consciousness of the people who attended, but I hope to see this continue once I leave, because, these issues that are happening in our world when it comes to the trans community and the boundaries that trans women are facing, all trans people are facing, is no joke. And the work has to continue. And so I just hope that with my leaving, once I graduate, that the work doesn't stop just because the trans woman who was in the center left. Right. And so people there need to continue showing solidarity, and people need to show up. It's about cis people with privilege, showing up for trans people. And that's what has to continue to happen. With that being said, a positive takeaway, there are a lot. It was really about education, awareness, raising consciousness, and listening to the stories being told, right? And the testimonies of trans women, trans people, and non-binary people in the documentary Disclosure, as well as reading, the written words of trans women and their own journeys with their transition in the book To My Trans Sisters. And that is really powerful. And we held that space. And it was, something really for us to be, I'm very thankful for that. So.
And it's definitely something. I guess that positive takeaway is that now this is in everyone's consciousness more so, or more actively. And so if moving on to the next question, if folks, definitely want to be or want to get more involved, what specific reading material or organizations would you recommend them check out?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I would say, last June, so last Pride Month, I actually worked with our graphic design and marketing intern, Jasmine, on a Pride Month series of posts. And so during Pride Month of last year, we highlighted books, movies, documentaries, TV shows, and podcasts that are spearheaded and created by LGBTQ and trans content creators, particularly Black, Indigenous, and persons of color within the trans and LGBTQ community. And so it's a little collection of a lot of content to just check out, and that should be on the Womxns Center Instagram. It should be easy to find, so go check that out. And I would say, if you want to really be an ally and you want to support, the trans community, donate directly to trans folks when you're able to. So, GoFundMe, there are organizations where, a lot of trans women need stable, gender affirming housing, gender affirming care, I had one for my FFS. I had a GoFundMe for my facial feminization surgery that I had in October, just a month ago. So donate directly to trans folks when you're able to. Donate to trans-led run organizations. Follow trans creators on TikTok and Instagram. Read literature and media created by trans people. And be proactive about educating yourself on the issues affecting trans communities. And I think another thing to just be aware of is be critical of the way trans people are being portrayed in the media. and speak up when someone is saying something derogatory or disgusting about a trans people or the trans community. You know, we need active allies. You know, it's about being anti-transphobic. So let's be anti-transphobic. And I would say when it comes to trans-led organizations or mutual aid projects, I have a list if you're interested. And
all of this will be linked down below because I don't want you to just like start listing. So.
Yeah. And I would say if you're interested in getting involved or learning more about mutual aid projects that directly serve trans women with material relief, the Cantu Queer Center, it's through UC Santa Cruz, but, it is on campus. They do have, a lot of services that are really beneficial to trans people. So, and the rest will be listed,
Yes. Cool. Unless there's like specific ones that you would like to highlight.
Yeah, I will. Absolutely. So let me see. One mutual aid that I adore is for the girls. And that one really is about getting aid and support to trans women who need money for housing, funds for housing, as well as for gender affirmation surgery. That one is great. Trans Defense Fund LA, they have an Instagram page. So if you're a trans woman or trans person, well, trans women listening, particularly Black trans women are centered with the kits. They provide free self-defense kits. If you sign up for one, they mail them to your house. And the TGI Justice Project is the Transgender Intersex Justice Project, and they really work on reentry programs and giving aid to trans women who have been affected by the criminal legal system, who have encountered the prison industrial complex, right? So providing them with housing, employment, resources, right? They really take a prison abolitionist approach in the work that they do. So.
And just like that, we've come to an end of our conversation. I wanted to extend another thank you to Nicole for joining us today, as well as extending another thank you to Yao, Cameron, Abby, and Kaz for all of the behind the scenes work that they put through or do. And, like I mentioned before, all of the reading material and social media accounts that we discussed earlier will be linked down below in the description. So there's always a need for improvement, even in the most diverse spaces, as I mentioned before, and it is our job as facilitators and inhabitants of said spaces to create an environment where we can foster these connections and establish solidarity with folks whose identities intersect within it. Thank you all so much for listening. And then if you enjoyed listening to our conversation that we had today and would like to hear more, please feel free to subscribe to our channel. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful and safe winter break.